Congratulations, you've completed the #1 goal in all of Pokemon. You've caught them all. Now what? This is a problem we might run into one day with Pokemon GO. No new Pokemon left to release, which could be serious trouble for the game and its players, but is it even possible? Today we look at what exactly happens when Pokemon GO runs out of Pokemon to bring into the game and how likely that is to happen. The most important piece of the puzzle here is understanding how Pokemon GO releases new Pokemon and how that's changed over the years. Back in 2016 when the game first came out, every Generation 1 Pokemon was available minus the legendaries or mythicals. Then in 2017, Pokemon GO did something they'd never do again. They released an entire new generation of Pokemon in the wild all at once. All 84 Johto Mons were available to catch in one single day, and it was extremely exciting. For about a month. Upon release, everyone was outside playing, grinding canning to evolve, and finding rare wild spawns. The game felt like 2016 again. But then people caught them all, evolved them all, and the hype died. And the next generation wouldn't be released for over 7 months. This is like the most dead the game has ever felt. If you played back then, you'll know what I'm talking about. The game was stale, there was like nothing new to get or catch or really do. And Pokemon GO learned from this. After this point, new Pokemon would come to the game in a completely different way, using new strategies that are still used today and most likely for the foreseeable future of the game. In October of 2017, the first wave release happened. A handful of new Pokemon from Generation 3 were available in the wild during the Halloween event, including Shuppet and Sableye. And if I'm not mistaken, they were available shiny too for the first time, which was really cool. So instead of a huge drop of the entire generation, they only released a little bit of it. And it seemed like this would be the strategy moving forward, because Pokemon GO announced at the time that more Generation 3 Pokemon would be added started gradually in December. This meant Generation 3 would be released slowly in waves. The first huge batch after Halloween happened December 8th, 2017, with a huge wave of 50 new Pokemon. Although this wasn't the entire generation, this was still a ton of Pokemon to go and get at once, which was extremely exciting. Then at the end of December, another big wave of 20 new Pokemon were released. Next, we saw 23 other Pokemon released at the end of January, including the ones everyone's been waiting for, like Salamence and Gardevoir. And the final wave came out in the beginning of February 2018, including the legendaries. So instead of releasing the entire generation all in one day, they released it slowly over about 5 months. And the following generation releases would change even more. Because if you think about it, getting 2 new generations every 12 months is way too fast. Pokemon GO would run out of Pokemon to release like in a couple of years, and that can't happen because obviously they want their game to last forever. So what they did next is spread out the Generation 4 release even further. Gen 2 took 1 day, Gen 3 took 5 months, and Gen 4 was released over a span of 13 months, which actually overlapped with the release of Generation 5, which first started rolling out in September of 2019. This was a new thing that we would start to see more often. A new generation would begin releasing before the previous generation was fully released. They didn't need to release the entire generation at one time. They could save the best Pokemon and hold them out to release over time. Gen 5 took another 12 months, and then Gen 6 was surprisingly released almost all at once, with the exception of a handful of Pokemon, legendaries, and megas that were slowly released super slowly over the span of several months after that. The next several years of the game, we saw pretty much the same strategy. A new generation would release first in a small wave, with more smaller waves happening throughout the year. But what about modern day Pokemon GO? Well, if you've played over the last year, you'll have noticed a super strong trend. Almost every single event sees the release of 1, maybe 2 new Pokemon, which seems to be a new route that the game has chosen. Now, instead of releasing in waves, they release in little dribbles, little drops of new Pokemon. And the game today, anyways, is more about the events that happen on a weekly, monthly basis rather than on the Pokemon that are released. So adding new Pokemon like once or twice a month to make the events specifically more exciting makes a lot more sense strategically, and it makes the events more fun to play. But how sustainable is that? Well, when scrolling through my Pokédex, you'll notice every single Pokemon in Generation 6, almost everyone is completely filled out. And after Gen 6, we're missing a couple of pieces here, but a lot of filler there, until you get to the newest generation released right here, Generation 9, which we still have like a ton left to go on. This generation has been available to catch for about 8 months now, and like less than half of them are in the game. So this generation specifically taking somewhere between like 1 to 2 years to fully release wouldn't really be the craziest thing ever. And actually, when looking in the Pokédex, there's some kind of weird things going on. For starters, there's only 15 Pokemon from Generation 8 that have been released, but there's 96 total in the gen. So where are all the Pokemon, and why have they all essentially been skipped over while we went right into Generation 9? Because of Pokemon GO's main strategy to never run out of Pokemon. You see, when a new Pokemon game releases, so does a new generation of Pokemon, typically. You know what I mean. And every time a new Pokemon game comes out, Pokemon GO does a celebratory in-game event celebrating the release of this new Pokemon game kind of as a marketing play to get more people on, the game, on the people's radar, to generate more sales for the game. But they do this by releasing new Pokemon from this new generation into Pokemon Go. So to keep up with Pokemon's main series game release schedule, Pokemon Go has to release new Pokemon from new generations long before the older generations are complete. Like, it's taken the Pokemon Company like over 20 years to fully release 9 generations, where it's only taken Pokemon Go, 8 years to release and go through the 9? Yeah, if they were to release the full generation before the start of the next one, the game would be done, like, now. Which is why Generation 7 still has a bunch of missing Pokemon even though it's been released for 2 years now. There's also specific Pokemon that are released in very specific ways that help string along the player base and elongate the game. The last Pokemon of every generation to be released is always either a legendary or a mythical. Like the Generation 4 Arceus, still not here after 6 years of the Sinnoh generation and Go. New legendary Pokemon are released at an extremely slow rate of maybe 1 to 3 per month max, typically only during special events. And new mythical Pokemon are even more rare. We only get a handful of new mythical Pokemon per year now. They're released almost always in exclusive research during major events that could take players weeks, even months to complete. Like the legendaries and mythicals from Generation 9 most likely won't be fully released in Pokemon Go until like Generation 10 or 11 comes around. They are very slow. Even for Generation 1, which is back in the day when the whole generation would just get released all at once. Mew, the final Generation 1 Pokemon, wasn't introduced until 2018, nearly 2 years after the game came out. Okay, so we know for a fact that Pokemon Go will always have new Pokemon to catch, like handfuls at a time, for the next couple of years. And we'll definitely keep seeing new legendary and mythical Pokemon release from the current generations that we have now over the next decade. And if you thought new Pokemon get released slowly now, wait until you hear about new shinies. Shiny Pokemon came to Pokemon Go with Magikarp and Gyarados back in 2017, and since then, they've been the single most exciting thing about the game. They're the biggest reason why people log on and play, the main things people go out and hunt for, and the #1 focus of all the major events like Community Day, Go Fest, and the tours. It takes years for the entire generation to have all of the shinies released. Like, I'm talking 3 to 6 years on average. And this is a really convenient thing for Pokemon Go to be able to keep new things coming to the game forever that are interesting and fun to hunt. Because of shinies, each new Pokemon technically has 2 releases, the Pokédex release and the shiny release, with the shiny release always being the more exciting release. When it's being released for the first time, you catch it once, it's in your Pokédex, you're done with it. But with the shiny, and like the 1 in 450 odds, you're gonna have to keep going out, keep hunting until you get lucky enough to get the shiny. It's way more engaging and way harder. Although a brand new kind of event was introduced into Pokemon Go that kind of expedited the whole new shiny Pokemon from a generation release and the whole releasing everything from a generation thing. Tour events. The Kanto Tour of 2021 was the first of its kind and officially released all Generation 1 Pokemon and shinies into the game. The full generation, all of them, and all the shinies, all of it all at once. Then the Johto Tour came the year after and did the same thing with Generation 2, followed by the Hoenn Tour and Generation 3. But then it changed. And this was a very important change. It might seem insignificant, but this is a big deal. The Sinnoh Tour of 2024 broke the streak of releasing the entire generation shiny all at once. There were several key Pokemon that didn't get released at all, including Arceus. So the one single event that forced Pokemon Go to release the entire generation shiny no longer does that anymore. Which I'm assuming is a strategy by Pokemon Go to just keep the game alive as long as possible. Because if they stayed on this tour event release schedule, eventually by releasing an entire generation and the whole generation shiny once per year, they would catch up to Pokemon's main series release schedule and we'd be back at the same problem of running out of Pokemon. Okay, if you're an OG Pokemon fan and you haven't really been following along with the new games recently, you'd be probably pretty surprised to see how weird some of these new Pokemon look. Like this thing. This is called Iron Thorns, not a Tyranitar. It's considered a Paradox Pokemon which was introduced in the newest Pokemon game, Scarlet and Violet. Which brings up the next key thing that will keep this game fresh to play for literal light years to come. Different forms. Over the last 2 decades of Pokemon, there have been some new forms released throughout that have given new fresh looks and abilities to old Pokemon and to newer Pokemon. Mega Evolutions came out in 2013 with Generation 6, Primal Pokemon came out the year after that, Dynamax and Gigantamax forms came out with Generation 8 in 2019, and Paradox and Terra forms with Generation 9 in 2022. You get the idea, a lot of new forms. Right now in Pokemon Go, we only have Mega and Primal. That's it. Which means there are tons of new special evolution mechanics and special forms to basically re-release the same Pokemon back into the game in a new, exciting way. For example, there are 16 Paradox Pokemon that are in the new Scarlet and Violet games that have not come to Pokemon GO at all yet. So many forms, new evolution mechanics, new things that have yet to be released still. Which I fully expect, by the way, those Paradox Pokemon for Pokemon GO to like string out over the next 5 years. So, no, that's probably what's gonna happen. Like, for example, we don't even have all the Mega forms that are available to get. All the Megas, like we're still missing Lucario, we're still missing, off the top of my head, whatever, there's still some other ones, right? We're missing Lucario? Yeah, we only have 41 Megas in Pokemon GO currently. That's the Mega Dex. Only 41. Those haven't all been released yet. And who knows what new evolution mechanics and forms future generations will bring. That'll just add to the list of stuff that, like, will eventually get released. Moral of the story here, Pokemon GO will never run out of Pokemon. What they will run out of, though, is possibly fun. If they're constantly just slowly dripping new Pokemon and new shinies into the game at like a painful rate, it makes the game overall less fun. Instead of a couple huge exciting releases, it turns into a bunch of just like a ton of very small, not exciting releases. Kind of makes the game boring. But Pokemon GO has done a great job of offsetting that cycle with big events like the Tour events and Go Fest and other major releases like that, where a ton of new things, new Pokemon, new shinies are released all at once. So they're doing it really, really well, balancing it really, really well, and making sure that this game never dies. And there's always new Pokemon, new forms, or new shinies to hunt at all times. So if you enjoyed the video, leave a like. Also, sneak peek. You guys have been asking. Wait. Listen, all I'm saying, all right? All I'm saying, stay tuned. Thanks for watching. See you next video.